Ah, I have access.
All right, well, I'm happy to be here. My name is Armen Stein, and I am the president of J Street Technology, and we are a company of about 10 people in Bellevue, Washington, and we build access and web applications. And today, I am here to show you a collection of tips and tricks. I actually presented some of these tips to this group, but it's been 5 years, and so I figured we could revisit some of them and make sure everyone's using them if they like them. And then there's some new ones as well in the collection. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I know, Jim, you have some people physically in the room there, and there might be other people that are logged in. So maybe you can help me moderate questions if they come up, because if in case I can't hear the audio very well. How does that sound?
That sounds good, and I'll keep an eye open for chat messages coming in.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, I am going to get going here. So what I'll do is start off with my presentation slides, and we'll just kind of walk through them, and then I'll flip back and forth to demos for things that can where it can help if I show a demo. I'm not going to go I'll just tell you right now that I'm not going to walk through code. I find that code marches are not really very fun in presentations, and they can be interesting at times, but I'm going to focus more on the overall possibility of these tips and tricks, and then I'll leave it up to you guys to dive into the code and figure out how to implement it in your own projects where that's appropriate. So, but if you do have specific questions about the code, I'm happy to dive in and show you. So, with that said, let's get going. I'm going to start off with the very first one, which we were just talking about before this call started, which was our J Street Access Relinker. This is a relinking tool that we use in every application that we build, and it connects to backend access databases. It does not do anything with SQL Server. In fact, it ignores all types of linked tables except for access tables. And this is available on our downloads page on our website, and it's free of charge. And I really recommend that people use it because it's something that's not for developers, although it is handy for developers because it enables you to quickly switch between different backend databases. So that's handy for developers, but mostly it's for end users. Basically, if you deliver a database update to a user and they open it up and it cannot find the backend database on their network, then all it does is pop up a Windows dialog and prompts them for where the backend database is now. So you can see from the bullets here, it just painlessly relinks. It handles multiple backend databases, so you can have 2, 3, 4 access backends all at once, for different tables, and it will relink all of them. There's no list of tables involved. There's no text file or any type of list of tables. All it does is query the existing links and then group them together into backend databases. So it figures out the path, and then for each of those paths, it prompts you for where it is now. There's also a couple of handy features. I won't really go into them in detail, but one of them is the auto relink. If you put the backend database in the same folder as the application, then this utility, if you set the switch to check the app folder, then it will automatically check the application folder for the backend database and relink it automatically without prompting the user. So that's a super handy feature for single user scenarios, but also it's really handy for work tables. So if you have a backend database of just work tables, like a work database, and it just goes right alongside the main application, then you can just deliver both of those into the folder and it will just relink automatically, and the user never has to be prompted. So that's pretty nice. As you see here, it does handle 64-bit access as well as 32, of course, and it handles password protected backend databases. Any question on this or any comments? I know some of you have probably used the relinker maybe that we provide. Any questions or comments? No?
No questions from here at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, sure. I'll just make sure that I ask from time to time. Otherwise, this is just going to be a one-way trip with me talking. Okay, so I'll move on. I don't think I need to really demo that one. I could, and it might come up while we demo other things, but I'm just going to go ahead and move on. This one is an old chestnut, I always think, and then every time I bring it up, there's somebody in the room that has never heard of doing this before. This happened just last week in Amsterdam when I did this presentation, and I thought, oh, do I even put this one in or not? Because it seems like such an old one, but quite a few people in the room in Amsterdam did not know about this technique. So I'm going to go ahead and add it here, talk about it quickly, and so that you guys can always use this in your error handling routines. So the bottom line is, in your error handlers, you add an extra resume after your normal resume exit procedure. This is the simplest error handler you can imagine. Basically, it says, hey, there was an error. I don't have any special handling for a particular number, so I'm going to drop into the else, and I'm just going to show a message box on the screen. And then I'm going to, after they see the message box and they close it, then I'm going to exit the procedure. Pretty straightforward, no big deal. There's an extra resume right here that will never run in real life. The whole point of putting the extra resume in here is that when you get an error in your code and it just shows the description, you can hit control break and drop into your code, and then you can move the little yellow arrow that shows your current line of code and move it down to the resume. Because what you're about to do is resume exit, but instead you can move your current line down to resume. Now, resume, as you probably know, is misnamed by VBA. Resume doesn't mean resume and continue, it means try again. So it really should say resume, try again, or something like that, to be more clear. But so what resume will do is immediately try again the line of code that caused the error. So there's a lot of times in code where you might have something weird, like a divide by zero error or some other error, and you don't know exactly which line of code caused it. And there's all kinds of line numbering and things that you can do, but if you haven't done any of that stuff, you just want to know the line that caused the error. And a lot of people will turn on debug mode and step through their code and try to find it. But this extra resume sitting here allows you just to run that line of code and immediately retry, and by hitting step, so you just hit your step mode, and you step to the next line, and there you go, that's the line that caused the error. It's so handy, and we just leave the extra resume in this error handler all the time. So every error handler we have, we copy and paste in a template for it, and this resume is in there. So are there any questions on the extra resume?
So when you got the message box up, you hit control break and it takes you back into code, right?
Yep, that's exactly right. You hit control break, and then one of the options is like debug, and you go into, right. It drops you into your VBA, and where you're sitting is on the next line of code that is going to run, which is the resume exit. But instead of the resume, so there'll be a yellow arrow right here because that's the next line of code that's going to run. All you do is drag that yellow arrow down to the resume, which is basically saying set the current line to the resume, and you're just circumventing what's really going to happen, and you're going to go and retry the line of code, which is way up higher in your procedure. It might be a couple hundred lines up there, and you're going to find that line is going to highlight. It's going to try it again. Of course, it's going to error again, but now you at least know which line caused the problem. Does that make sense?
Yep. I use that technique. It's so nice when you're in development.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're not in development, it will never run. The code will never get to that point because you always run the resume that's right above it first, which is bailing out of the procedure, and you're done. So this is just left in there as a little gift for developers when they run into an unexpected error. So that's this one. All right.
Thank you.
Oh, John's asking a question. How did I discover this? You know what? Many, many years ago, I remember hearing about this tip, and I saw it in some code, and I scratched my head and I was like, what the heck is that? and someone, when I forget where I found it, and someone explained it to me, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's genius. And so we just put it in our templates after that. I knew that the resume was a try again, but try again is hardly ever used in real code, because if you get an error once, I got news for you. You're probably going to get it another time as well. Sometimes there's a resume that's used in real code when there's some, you hit an error and then you do something in the code to resolve the problem. Like, I don't know, you do something else, you do a do events, you put something in a table, you do something new, and then you truly do a resume, and you kind of iterate until it goes through, but it's rarely used in the wild. This is the only time we ever use just a plain resume. So yeah, good question. Yeah. Okay, here's one that is also another technique that we have used for, I would say years, but actually it's decades. We've used this technique for so long, and basically it's backwards from what most developers do. Most developers build a form, and then they gather criteria on the form. Let's say in this case that's in the shot here, it's, the project is led by, or which project do you want to pick? It could be a date range, whatever. You're going to gather criteria to run the report. So most developers gather criteria on a form, and then they click a button or something, and that opens a report. And that probably sounds really familiar to a lot of you guys. We do it the opposite way. What we do is we open the report directly without any criteria yet, and the report stops and opens a criteria form in dialog mode. And I will actually show this. I'm going to go ahead and go to this report selection techniques here. So what we do is we run the report, which I click on a button here, but I can also, nothing up my sleeve, I can double click the report here and run it. And you notice the report doesn't open. What happens first is that there's a dialog box with, oh, I want to see just projects that were led by Armen. Okay, so that opens the report, and then I can close the preview. So what's going on? Well, what's going on is the report opens, like I said, and in the on-open event of the report, which is before the report renders or even shows anything on screen, it doesn't even appear yet, we open a form in dialog mode, which is this form that gathers the criteria. And then what we do is we take the criteria and we stick it into a hidden field up at the top of this form. It's a hidden control called the where clause. And then when the report, when this form, when the user clicks OK, the form is hidden. Now, when a form is displayed in dialog mode, all code stops at that line. So the open form runs, but it's in dialog mode, so all code stops and does not proceed. As soon as the form is hidden, the code can continue running. Well, the very next line of code says, well, if the user wants to continue, so we check another hidden field that says, did they click OK or did they click cancel? If they clicked OK, then the continue is yes. And then the report looks at that hidden where clause that we built and says, I'm going to change my own where clause of the report to include that where clause, and then I'm going to continue opening, because that's what the open event is all about. So what that does is gives us a few really nice benefits from that. First of all, you don't have to have a bunch of different forms, one for every report, and you don't have to have a form that gathers a whole bunch of criteria. And then I've seen people go through all kinds of crazy stuff where they hide and show different criteria based on which report they want to run. In this case, the dialog box is just what you want for the report, and it might be used by more than one report. For example, you might have other reports that show different sorts or different details or whatever, but it has the same criteria. Like, let's say I just want to know which division I'm in, or all, or I want to see a date range. Well, those criteria could be used by lots of reports. So what's cool is you only have to build the form once. It's nice and clean. And then all report A, B, and C can all call that one dialog. So it's a reusable module that can be used by any reports you need. Another advantage is that the criteria is remembered during the session. So if I go back here and I run the report again, look, my name is still there. So that report was just hidden all this time. And when I run the report again and it opens this form, well, you know that when you do an open form on a form that's hidden, all Access does is make the form visible. It doesn't need to open it because it's already open. So what's cool is that if I change this to another setting and I click OK again, you can see that every time I come back and I run it, it's going to remember the same setting. So if I change this to employee 6, I run it, oh, there's no records, that's fine, the report was canceled, but when I run it again, it's still employee 6. So it remembers it each time. So it only remembers it for the duration of the session, of course, because it's just a hidden form. When Access closes, it closes. But it's really nice because users like going in and tweaking criteria and running the report a few times till they get it right, and they don't have to fill the whole darn thing out again. So any questions on this technique?
No, that's actually kind of cool.
That is cool. I use a variation of that, Armen, so that the selections that you have on the screen, rather than being available for the session, are available in subsequent sessions. And what I do is the information you put on the form, I dump it into the registry. And when the form opens, it reads the registry, and if it finds any saved stuff there, it repopulates itself.
Yeah, so basically it's local to that machine.
Yeah.
So it's not saved on the server, it's local to the machine. So if they ever move to another machine or use another Windows profile, then it would not be available. Is that right?
That's right, but each person has their own custom set of settings that way also, since they each have their own machines. I mean, it's just a variation.
Yeah, no, that's good. Another way to do that would be to have a user table in the back end, and that way it could follow the user instead of being for the machine. And then, but yeah, there's different ways to do that. This is just a simple one of just in the session, and we don't have to actually store off all the values and reload them because they're already there. The form is already there and hidden. So you can use this. Anyone who's listening to this talk can go to our J Street downloads page, and there's this download called Report Selection Techniques, which is the one that I'm running right here. So it's been out here a long time. You can see copyright 2009, and it has our old logo, but the bottom line is this code is all in there, and you can see how it works. If you go into the report and look in the on open event, you'll see how it prompts for the form, which is right here. So it basically opens this form in dialog mode and gathers the criteria and then continues on. So if there's no other questions, I'll move on to the next tip. Okay, this one is, I think, a really valuable way to handle lookup values that you end up turning inactive. And it's the way we use it in all of our Access applications. And actually, we use this exact same technique on the web also. Obviously, the coding is different on the web. When we build web applications, we're using ASP.NET MVC Core for the technology. But the visual of it, the way it looks to the user is exactly the same. So let me just go through this real quick and see if I get any feedback from you guys on how you guys have handled this. So first of all, you cannot delete a lookup value if it's being used, right? So if you have someone's favorite color and the color is blue, and you try to delete the value for blue, well, if you've enforced RI, referential integrity, then obviously you cannot delete the color blue because it's been used by somebody. So everyone's clear on that, right? So what you do is you can't delete it, so people want to deactivate it. So what they do is they mark records as inactive, and that's fine. But if you omit the inactive records in any combo box where you have to choose a color, then the existing value disappears, because if you're using auto number keys like you should be, then let's say blue is key 17. If you deactivate blue and you try to show it in a combo box, well, the 17 will still be there for a historical record that someone chose blue, but the word blue won't appear anymore. It'll be blank Any questions on that behavior? Everyone understands what I'm talking about, right? I will assume so. So what I want to do is show an application.
I'm sorry, we had mute on. You got a whole round of yeses here, Armen.
Awesome, no problem. I'm going to assume yes, but I'm going to take a breath every once in a while so that I make sure that you have a chance to ask. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I have this chamber application, and this one, this code, some of the code I'm showing you today will be available on the website. Other code I'm going to make available. Jim, you're going to handle making it available to attendees or members of DAAUG. So we'll handle that. This one is one. This one is one that if you're an attendee or a member, you'll be able to get this sample. But the bottom line is, if I go into businesses here and I drill down on a business, I can see that the district that this business is in, and let me just show this a little closer here. The district that this business is in here is the 15th district, and that's fine. But you notice there's an asterisk on the front. So what we do is we show all the districts that are available, and we put an asterisk in front of the deactivated ones. And the way we do that is like this. We add an active flag to the lookup table. So we just name it district active flag in the case of the district table, and we default it to true. And the reason we default it to true is because I want it to be an active flag, not an inactive flag, because I hate double negatives, and I never want to see any code that says, if not inactive, then, oh, we're going to show it, because I just don't like that terminology. So what we do is we have an active flag in tables that need it, and we default it to true. Pretty straightforward. Then what we do is we design the combo box. What we want to do is sort the inactive records down to the bottom, but then by name. So in other words, we want alphabetical of all the active ones, and then alphabetical of all the inactive ones. So that's fine. We wanted to show that. So what we do is down in the row source of the combo box, we have a field that I just named district name active. And what that means is it's the district name. That's fine here. But what we do is we concatenate a star on the front if the active flag is false. And one little quick trick here, you never want to compare in your code to something being true. True in Access is -1. True in every other language in the whole freaking world is +1. So you don't want to accidentally check for a -1, but some web interface or some other interface actually put in a +1. You always want to check for 0 or false, or it's not 0 or false. So that is a case where you do have to do a double negative sometimes. So if you check for 0, you prepend a star on the front, an asterisk. Otherwise, you prepend an empty string. So that way, the district names have a star on the front when they're inactive, but when they're active, they don't have the star on the front. Now, that's fine, but they're still not going to sort properly, so we need to have another way to sort them. So what we do is I say district active flag absolute, and I say if the active flag is 0, put in return a 0, otherwise return a 1. That's just using a quick immediate if, and sort descending. So that way, all the ones, all the actives will be at the top, and then by name. So there's another sort over to the right that's ascending by name. So now all the actives will be at the top, ascending by name, and then all the inactives will be at the bottom, also ascending by name. So that's how we get the final result of showing that. Now, that has some nice advantages, because now I can safely type in the number that I want, or the name that I want. So let's say let's say this was empty, and hang on a sec. Let's say this was empty and I just wanted to type. So if I type north, I can type north. If I type BR, I can get Broadway. So I get normal selection of active values, but I'm not going to be bothered by the inactive values unless I type star and then off Capitol Hill, and I can select it that way. So in other words, I have to know what I'm doing to select an inactive value. Now, if I do that and I hit tab, then it says, are you sure you want to select an inactive value? So that's another thing that we can do, is you can put in a warning. So what you can do is you can stick a warning in on the before update of that particular control and stick a little message box in there if you want to, and say, do you want to pick an inactive value? Now, I sometimes get the question, Armen, why would anyone want to pick an inactive value for a record that you're entering? And the answer that I always come up with is for historical reasons. Let's say you have a salesperson who was terrible and he made one sale and you said, okay, the final straw, he only made one sale, and you fire him. Now, the salesperson is going to be switched to inactive, but then you realize you have to go back and enter an order. That last order that he got, you're going to enter it into the system after he's gone. So you want to be able to go in and put in an order for an inactive salesperson. So it's not a normal thing, but you want to be able to do it. I don't like systems that stop people from doing what a human might want to do. I just want them to know what the ramifications are. So that's why we put in a message box like this. Are you sure you want to select an inactive value? And when I say yes, it goes ahead and lets me do it. If I switch it to a regular value, it doesn't prompt me, obviously. And if I want to switch back to an inactive value and I say no, then it just pops back into the field and says, okay, you know, the before update is canceled. I'm not sure what you want to do, but if I'll switch it over to Broadway, then I'm fine. So that's the demo of that particular technique. I'm really curious about ways that other people have handled it, and or whether this seems like a good way for you guys.
I use that technique, Armen. This is Jim. If you go back to your query, I take it a step further. I actually will put in a calculated column I would call district name active, and have my concatenation take place in the table, and just use that column for my combo boxes. It saves a step. And if I'm doing this kind of a combo box several times in the application, I don't have to think about whether or not I get the formula right every time.
Yeah, that's a good point. Using a calculated field, that would be actually a pretty good use of a calculated field. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I like that too.
Anyone else? Has anyone else used a different technique than this that seems any cleaner?
I used the same technique, and I came up with that all by myself. So there must be something about great minds, Armen.
Yeah, multiple and simultaneous invention. I love it. Yeah, so this is something that I think that developers that are just starting off or trying to polish their applications a little bit better, this can be a really nice technique to have in your hip pocket. So good. Okay, well, let's move on to the next one, which is a little more complex, but it happens all the time. This is basically the way to put all into combo boxes when you're doing a selection. So the way this one works is, let's see, I actually want to use a different, well, like for example, in this one, if I want to put all here at the top, then how do I do that? Well, the way you do it, of course, is with a union query. So I want you guys to have this technique if you're not used to it already. So anyone watching this can use this technique. The first thing I like to say is how to describe a union query, because it confuses some people. You can't build a union query directly in the Access Designer. You have to use SQL View. And the way I like to describe a union query is that a regular query, a regular join that joins two tables, is what I call a horizontal join. It joins records from table A and table B this way. But a union query is a vertical join. It joins tables from records from table A and records from table B vertically, so it adds more rows instead of more columns. That's the easiest way to think of a union query. So the way this is used as a union query is you can select a dummy record. I just say select a 0 as a key, all as the name, and something else as a flag, and I select it from TBL user, but notice I'm not selecting any actual records. I'm only selecting dummy records from table user. So it just gives me one dummy record. And then I select the regular users here. So in this example, the users show up down below. So What that gives me is the ability to have this extra value at the top of the list. And since it's sorted by name and the less than sign is less than just about everything in the alphabet, well, it's less than every letter and most symbols, then the all sorts to the very top. And you can actually select it by pressing the less than key in the combo box, and it will jump right to the all record. Any questions on this technique, or have you used this before?
Hi, here's Klaus from Germany. I use union all. I don't use union. I use union all because when you use union all, the first value stays on top, so you don't need that sorting technique.
Oh, that's interesting. I'd have to experiment with that. So you're saying just by using union all, you force the records that are in the first select statement to be at the top and not mixed in?
It doesn't sort them. Union all doesn't sort. It just union all, in spite of union, gives you all records, because if you use union and you have a double record, it's sorted out normally. The normal union, it's sorted and the value is sorted out. But if you say union all, it's not sorted. It's just combined.
Oh, interesting. I'd have to experiment with that. I like that approach. I'm a little confused about how the rest of the records would be sorted though, because the second table would still need to be sorted alphabetically, right?
Oh, that's true, yeah. But you can, I think you can use sort on the second table, I think.
So the order by is still respected down here for the second table.
I think so. I don't know. To be honest, I don't know.
But you haven't noticed any problem. I mean, they're not random, right? They're sorted down below.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good point, Klaus. Thank you. I think I'll play around with that and see what happens.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question. Klaus, what time is it in Germany? 3 a.m.?
What, please? I didn't get you.
It's 9.
What
Yeah,
time is it?
3 a.m. It's 9 hours.
Oh, it's 3 o'clock now in the morning.
Well, thanks for joining us at 3 a.m.
And Klaus, I just came back from Amsterdam, so to my body, it's still 3 a.m. So I'm trying to get through my.
I believe you, yeah.
So what you do is when the user selects the special record, which is all, then what you do is you replace the where clause that you want to use with nothing. In other words, if they select all, you snip out the where clause. And I really strongly recommend that you guys download on JStreet Downloads, free. These are all free. We have a utility called SQL Tools, and basically it includes a function called replace where clause, which does exactly what it says. You send in your whole SQL statement. It finds where the where clause begins and ends, which is harder than it sounds, because it has to parse out all the different components of the SQL statement. You know, the select, the where, the having, the group by, the order by, everything. It pieces all of those out, finds the where clause, and replaces it with the one that you send in. So basically, you say replace where clause. Parameter 1 is the SQL statement, and parameter 2 is the new where clause that you would like it to have. It finds the old one and removes it and puts in yours. What happens though if you send in a null? Well, it just removes the where clause, so it runs the query wide open. So that's a really handy utility that you can use to manipulate where clauses in SQL statements. Anywhere where you have them, you can use this little utility to swap it. We also have replace order by clause. So you can replace the where clause and or the order by clause by calling each of those functions and swapping in just that piece. Now I'm going to go off on a tangent just for a second here. The reason that we invented replace where clause is because I have a strong opinion that SQL statements should live in their native habitat, and their native habitat is either in a saved query or in a query property. You know where SQL statements should not live? They should not live in code. So I don't like the technique of building up a select statement in code where you say, you know, select field 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 from table whatever, join whatever, you know what I'm talking about, the whole select statement. That should not live in code in 99% of the scenarios. So in order to build a new select statement that has a new where clause, you need to find where it lives, the proper place where it lives, like in a query or in a property, bring it into code. Don't mess with all of that stuff, just replace the where clause. Does everyone follow me on that, on my strong opinion on where they should live?
Sure, we understand your strong opinion. We don't agree with it.
Armen,
Yeah.
you got some disagreement here. I agree with you.
Yeah, it's one of those things where here's one of the reasons that I don't like people building select statements in code. It's pretty handy, and I know you can do it, and we're all good programmers, but some of the hardest to debug errors that I've ever found when the system is running is when you look at a form, you look at the select statement in the, let's say in the record source of the form, and it looks perfectly legit, and you run it, and it runs, and it's fine. You copy and paste it out of there, you open it in a query, it runs fine. And then you run the form, and then there's some missing field or some parameter expected or whatever message where you have you're out of sync. Somehow you don't have the field you need, and you're like, why don't I have the field I need? I'm looking in the record source, and there it is. But you know what you find? You go into the code, and you find that the developer replaced the record source of his own form with one that he or she built in code, and he forgot a field. So in other words, the form is perfectly fine in design, but when it runs, the rug is pulled out from under that form because somebody tried to build a select statement laboriously with multiple lines, and they got it wrong. So that's why you can even get the syntax wrong. Like, let's say you have a SQL statement built in code and you get the syntax wrong, you'll never know until it runs. So that's the main reason why I don't like select statements, or the select part anyway of a SQL statement built in code. I understand that we have to build a where clause in code, but that's just the where clause. It's a small piece. The structure of the entire statement with all the joins and everything, the complex part, that should be living in its native habitat. So I'll get off my soapbox, but that's why we built the SQL tools, is so that we could snip out the parts that we want to replace and just put in another piece and then move on with our day. So
Okay.
I don't know if
Another comment here.
Yeah.
You're
So,
perfect. Oh, sorry. You first.
Go ahead.
Okay. Your statement is perfectly valid, but I do just the other way around. But what I do is always look that the select statement I create by code is, before I just do it in the form or what, is a one-line statement, so that I can always debug the complete statement when I see I've got an error, and then I call the query statement of the query and put the SQL in the query, and then I see the error. That's point one. And the second point, I have a VBA code which creates a query from the code, so that I'm doing the code via VBA, but then I'm creating a normal query which I could select separately. So
right.
I'm not with you at that point.
Yeah, no, I understand. I guess I just do it the other way around. I like storing, if I need a saved query that has a particular complex structure. And remember, I'm not talking about like trivial SQL statements. There might be a SQL
Sure.
statement that joins like 4 or 5 tables together. It's possible. So those are really complex, and I would always rather see those living in their normal query habitat. and not sitting in code somewhere where you have to laboriously check to make sure that they're okay. But we can agree to disagree on this one. But if you do decide to come around to my way of thinking and store the query in a property or an actual saved query, then in order to not have to build the whole thing over again, this is what I'm talking about. In the old days when I first started coding, I thought, oh, I've got so much power, I can build the entire SQL statement when I need it. And sometimes I had to do that just to change the where clause. So instead of building the whole thing over and over again and constantly running into these errors, I just decided I'm going to put the whole complex thing in a place where it's supposed to be and just snip out and replace the where clause, which is why we basically invented the replace where clause utility. I've looked around, I haven't really looked for it, I can't say that, but I've never come across this particular replacement utility from anywhere else. And it probably exists, I'm sure, you know, simultaneous invention, but this is one that works reliably and we use it all the time. And this enables you to do what I'm suggesting, which is keep it in the proper place. So there was another question or comment, I think.
Yeah, we got a question here from Phil.
Okay.
Well, it's probably more of a comment. So building stuff in code, particularly if you're opening forms, for me, it seemed if I had a number of combo boxes or if I had a lot of upfront query that I had to pull in order to open the form seemed to run faster when I used the code in VBA to create a SQL statement and then apply it on load versus having that ready to go on the form. That seemed to bog it down. Did you notice anything?
Yeah, if you do have a lot of combo boxes on a form, it's possible that it's going to take time for them to load, but I don't know that it's going to take more time than if you build all those same SQL statements and then stick them into the combo boxes at load time. It's going to have to do the same amount of work either way. One, you might perceive that it's faster if you can delay loading those other row sources until later. In other words, let's say you don't need them all, they're on different tabs or something like that, then you can kind of stagger out the loading so it doesn't seem as long. I don't know. In our shop, for combo boxes, we always keep the row source in them live and so active. However, if the back end is SQL Server, we often use pass-through queries or something really fast to drive those combo boxes instead of access queries, because you might not get all the benefit of the speed of SQL Server if you have access queries on the front end. Sometimes we want to push them through with pass-throughs. Does that make sense?
It does. I think, and it's one of those things where you code things once a while back. You have it in your mind that this works a lot better this way, yeah, and then you don't revisit it. I agree with you that when they're on separate tabs and you're not viewing them and you can open them up separately, when you open up the tabs, that form is definitely going to load faster because you haven't activated the combo box. You don't have to load all the query information. I'd have to retest it again to determine whether or not the form as it stands, if you opened it up with the SQL statements in the row source of a combo box versus producing them through code and then applying them.
Right. Yeah, I don't know why that would be faster. Yeah, I don't know why it would be faster though, because access either way is needing to load that row source. So whether it's already there or whether you have to build it and throw it in there, I'm not sure. I would need to see that. It's kind of funny what you're talking about is I call it like superstition and folklore. Like a lot of times you're right, something works or doesn't work and you remember that, and maybe either A, it's not true anymore, or B, it's actually was never true. There was something else going on that we got confused by, and then we have a belief. And I know that's certainly been true for me. I would like to see like actual testing to see if that really is true. Another thing I'll offer you is that you don't have to store, like if you really wanted to go with the principles I was talking about and not build SQL statements in code, you still could do your technique, but what you could do is you could store the SQL statement in one of its 2 native habitats. And in this case, you don't want to use the property, but you could put it in a saved query, and then you could read that saved query and bring in the SQL from that saved query and just use it as a storage container. Bring in that saved SQL and then apply the record source or the row source. The other thing you could do is you could actually use that query. You could have the combo box have no row source at all, and then at load time you could say, you know what, make that combo box's row source the name of that query and just attach it there on the fly. So in other words, you still
There's a number of techniques.
Yeah.
I think I have a speed test that I would use to test that out. When I'd open a form, it would go through and it would calculate start time and end time.
Right.
I'll do it again just to retest and see what the outcome.
It would be an interesting thing to do. Yeah. Okay, so are we? I think we're done with this technique.
Again, I do just the other way around. I sometimes have a fixed query name and just create the query with this fixed name new, and don't change it on the form.
Right. Yeah, and that's so in other words, you're using the query. You're using a query name to drive, for example, a combo box or either a row source or a record source.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's fine because it's still in its native habitat. That's okay.
Yeah, it depends, as always.
Yeah. Okay.
I normally, if I have a complete a complex query, I'm always going to create that in the normal query and then took out the code and just replace some fields with the fixed names. That's the only reason why I do it, because I'm too lazy to change all that and just replace the names then with the new content.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the next one. This is quick date. Do any of you guys in your applications have keyboard shortcuts for incrementing and decrementing dates? Do you use this already? Anyone say yes?
Nope.
Silence. Okay. I think you guys might like this. Let me go to, let's see here. The problem is I have multiple demos. Let's see. Selection. Oh, maybe I closed it. Oh boy. Here. So what I wanted to show you is the chamber application again. Huh. Oh, because that was a lock file. Yeah, it looks like it's still open. There we go. Okay, so I'm going into this record again, and notice down here, I'll zoom for you. Notice down here there's a column with dates. So, and that date's really way out there, 2029. So that's because I've been showing this before. If I click in this date field, you notice I have a calendar control. That's normal. Everyone has that, no problem. But what I want to be able to do is actually go back a year at a time. So you can see that I can decrement the date by a year or a month. I can go back months at a time, or I can back even weeks at a time. I can go weeks or even days. And I'm doing that by just clicking my keyboard. So we built a quick date routine. And the reason I did this is because I've used QuickBooks and Quicken and those types of accounting programs, and they all have this feature where if you click into a date, you can hit plus or minus and just add days or remove days by hitting plus or minus on my keyboard. So that's what I did in this case. And the way it works is there's one line of code in the key down event of that control, and it calls this quick date code that we wrote, and it sends in the active control and the key code and the state of the shift key. And then it shows this, and then it runs this procedure, the centralized procedure, which I have right here. And you don't have to really understand all this code. You can go through it if you like, but the bottom line is this is called from a control, and what it does is if you type in a +1 or a -1, you add or subtract days, and see this VB key add and subtract, and then if the VB is the key M, you go back a month, and so on. If it's H, you go forward a month. And the reason it's M and H is if you think about the word month, it starts with an M and ends with an H. So that's the way all these other programs like these accounting systems do it. M and H is month back and forward. Y and R is the beginning and end of the word year. So it's Y and R. And then week is W and K. And then if you want to go back to today, you can just flip instantly to today by just pressing T. So if you press T, it goes right to 9/19/2019. So what does everybody think of that technique to have another way for your users to enter dates quickly?
Nice.
Yeah, I'm gonna, yeah.
Yeah, there are definitely applications for that in where people are working with dates a lot.
Oh, yeah.
The date picker's waste of time.
I think people are going to be asking me for copies of your code now.
Exactly. So that code, this code here is just in, it's all it is a sub in a module, and then it says, and here's the little hint of what to do. Call it with the key down event, and then it has the example. And then you can look at the example. If Jim gives you this chamber application, you can see the example in this subform down here. So you'll be able to see. And again, I don't want to march through code today. I just want to show you things that we do, and then point you in the right direction to go ahead and do it yourself. And this is pretty slick. We do this all the time. Whenever we have a report selection criteria, you know, I told you about the report calling a form, the technique to do that. Whenever there's a date range, it's so handy. Like in my business, we're in the consulting business, and so we measure number of billable hours, for example, that we've done in a particular week or in a particular month or in a range of weeks. And I can't tell you how cool it is to be able to set up a week, like a 1 week span in the criteria, run the report, and then come back using that form technique I showed you before, and then go into the second field, the two, you know, from and to. I go into the to and I hit K a couple of times because that jumps forward a week at a time. I don't have to look at the calendar and try to count how many weeks down. I can do 10-week span by just hitting W backwards or K forwards and just counting how many times I hit it, and then I can get a perfect 10-week or an 8-week span doing that instead of trying to count through month after month on this calendar control. So anyway, I think I've sold it. If you guys want to use this technique, it's pretty easy to implement by all this code that we've figured out already, so you don't have to.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Here's another one that we use in lots and lots of applications. We call it the Better Record Finder, and there's the old binocular control in Access where you just find a record, and everyone's used that before, and some people actually inflict that on their users, and I think that thing is really hard to understand. For one thing, it has a backwards and forwards option, and it says, do you want to look in this field or all fields? And there's a bunch of, anytime you give people options that they don't quite understand, it makes your software harder to use. So what we do is we just do it so that you can just type in a value and try to find it. And I'll show you an example in our template, which is right down here. If I could let's see here. I still am having trouble selecting this one. There we go. So if I go into an index form here, you see there's 3 contacts. This record finder up here is really simple. So I could just type in here, and you notice it jumps right to the 3rd record. And that's because the word here appears somewhere in the record. I won't go into all the detail about this code, but I can tell you that this code is very easy to implement on your form. You take this group of controls from like, for example, from this template that I'm showing you. You take this group of controls and you copy and paste them, and then each of these controls here has 1 line of code behind it. And you can just copy that in, apply the 1 line of code behind each of these controls, and then it uses a whole bunch of complex code to look through all the fields in your record set clone, and then do a find and position the record, and loop through the list. Now this is a trivial example because there's only 3, but you can do this for any length of record set. And importantly, you can do it whether it has an access backend or a SQL backend. And the reason it doesn't matter is because everything we're doing is based on the record set behind this form and using a clone of it to manipulate the searching and finding bookmarks. It never goes back to the backend data at all. It's only searching through the record set. So any questions on just how this technique works?
Very nice.
So, hey, Armen, this is Ken.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
So it looks like if where I'm working now, we have a thing where we have customers, we have a customer, and we also have a project name. Sometimes they're the same. So if I was to use a technique like that, it would find me the projects and or the customers.
Yeah.
Do I understand that?
Yeah, what you do is you specify right here, hopefully you can read this. There's a call. If after the update, I do a find record like, and find record like, let me shift F2. Find record like basically says call this find record, and I send in, I think we have up to 10 fields that you can send in. So you can specify the names of all the fields you want to search. Does that make sense, Ken?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
So what we're doing is,
good.
yeah, we're only using this 1 chunk of code in the form itself, and we're calling a centralized function called find record. And we're saying send in the form that I'm on, send in some references to the controls like the first and next button, and the text that I want to find, and then which option to find, whether it's contains or starts with, and which find mode. So that, in other words, there's a bunch of different things here, but the bottom line is I'm going to search these 3 fields in this case, but you could have up to 10 of these, so you can search across a whole bunch of columns. And then what it does is this tricky thing. I won't get into too much detail, but I wanted to show you this tricky thing that it does. Instead of writing a bunch of code to do a bunch of or clauses, you know, like if this field has it, or this field has it, or this field has it, you get what I'm saying? Instead of writing a big SQL statement for that, we actually only write 1 SQL statement. What we say is, what we do is we build up this long string with all of the fields that you wanted to search. And then what we do is we put a spacer in between each of those fields called this field delimiter. And the field delimiter is just this nonsense group of characters that would never appear in nature. And the reason for that is we don't want 2 fields together we don't want to span over 2 fields. In other words, if you had Seattle, Washington, and in the city and the state field, right? Then if someone typed in LE, because that's the end of the word Seattle, and W, because that's the beginning of the word Washington, if they typed in LEW, then we would find this record, but it wouldn't make any sense because those are 2 different fields. So what we do is we artificially break them apart with this delimiter that would never occur for real. So I just give you a clue of that's what it is. It's @ %, %, @. So we space them all out. We combine all the fields together with all these optional field values, whatever ones you specified, and then we do our find first or our find next, and we try to find any field that any time that what we're searching for appears in this giant string that we've built. So it can just quickly jump through the record set clone and find whenever the thing you're looking for appears in any of the fields you specified.
Very, very good.
And this code here, look at that. We built it a long time ago. This code here is I'm making available to you so you can just stick it in your application, and this you never have to look at. It just does what it does. But this is the only code you have to put into your form. All you have to do is put in this find record like, that's all. And then behind each of those little pieces, you have to put in, let me Control Shift F2, go backwards. You have to go back and just put in the calls to this, either in first or next, because all I have to know is whether you want to find the first one at the top of the list or if you want to jump through the list and keep going. And so there's a minimum amount of code that you have to put in. So all you have to do is, let me close this code window. All you have to do is grab this group of controls like this, grab all of these, copy and paste them onto your form, and then hook up that little bit of code behind this form to your form, and you're off and running.
Bingo.
Yeah, it's really cool. We just use it everywhere. Was there a question?
So Armen, this is good for text fields only, or will it work with dates?
It's very good with text fields. I don't remember if I have to look at the code to see if it would convert dates to a string so that you could search for a date. It's always going to be a string though, because whatever you type in up here is going to be a string. So if I put in test, well, that's going to be everyone. If I put in, well, like I said here, it goes to the end and wraps back around again. I don't know if I included the date. I don't think I did. So that's a good question, Jim. I'd have to play around with that.
Also, I've done something similar to what you're doing here, but rather than having up to, as you say, 10 fields, I send through one parameter that's all the field names with semicolon delimited. I split them into an array and handle it that way.
Yep, you can do it that way too. The reason we did it this way with optional parameters is it was just for simplicity. That way we could build a block of code that just worked and we didn't have to loop through the array or loop through a collection, let's say, to find and build all the SQL statement that way, but it's certainly doable that way. This way is already built, and what we found is that the chances of having more than 10 columns that you actually want to search on is pretty low. And you could always extend the code to make more of them if you wanted, and then you don't have to worry about looping through collection. So again, always more than one way to solve the problem, but this way has been working for us.
Yeah.
I've done that especially for names within a form where I'm searching the pre-name and the surname and the city and so on, and I find it better to just use one blank as delimiter, because people often want to search for John Doe if the name is John Donuts, and if I would use that special delimiter you use, that wouldn't be that good. So
yeah, that's the only problem with what you're doing there, is you could get unintended results if people are trying to concatenate other things. So
yeah, you could, but as you have a space between, it's not very likely. You have a delimiter, one space.
Yes,
Because
yes, I understand.
And
that way, if they type in one space and you are delimiting with one space, then it's going to match up. And you could get some weird results by trying to monkey with the system. Like for this screen that I have here, you could type in AL space 1, and you wouldn't find anything that had AL1 in it, but you would find this record.
Yeah.
And we just wanted to treat all the fields separately so that we would just do sort of a wildcard search without any concatenation. But you could literally go into our code and change that delimiter string to a space, and it would work exactly how you're saying.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that sometimes it's useful if you can decide the user to search for a combination of fields, especially
Yes.
if it's the name range. If you have the name and the address, then it's more useful to use a space. That's the only point I wanted to make.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. And I also want to be clear too that this only searches for the phrase that you type. It does not do like a Google search, which is very complex, where if you type in A space B space C, it's going to look for A anywhere in there and B anywhere in there and C anywhere in there. It doesn't do that type of a search. It would look for just this one phrase because it's just a simple record locator.
Yeah, like mine is, but
right.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the next one I want to show is the concept of using what we call panels. I don't know what their real name is, but we've always called them panels instead of using tabs. So we all love tabs. I've seen lots of forums out in the wild where people build them with tabs, and we sometimes use tabs also. There's nothing wrong with tabs intrinsically. They're easy to code. It's already built in. There's great, but you can have too many tabs. You can have tabs that go across the top of a form. In fact, sometimes you can have so many tabs that you have to have a second row of tabs. And that's when it becomes unwieldy and it becomes hard for the users to use and to find. Because it's the moment you have to scan from left to right to find the tab you're looking for, and then when you click it, it Rolodexes vertically as well, then it's a lot harder to find where those are. So Microsoft realized it too, because notice that a lot of their like dialog forms for options and things like that, they don't have tabs along the top like they used to in old versions of Windows and old versions of applications. They now have these panels down the side. So they know that tabs aren't very good, and so we should do the same thing. So what we do is we use panels. Now I'll show you the mother of all forms actually that we built years ago. It is right here. If I go into the projects table and I drill down on a particular project, let's see, I'll go down to this test one that I have. Notice that this could have had all of these across the top as tabs, because about this one project, there are many, many different forms of information. So I have the general panel, I have detail, I have buildings, units. You see all these complex forms that are about this apartment building. Documents, dates, financial information, the IRS 8609 form. You can see all of these. Well, that would be extreme if we had this many tabs along the top. And not only that, but tabs along the top can't do something like this, where if I click a checkbox here, I can actually see the full set, and you have to actually even scroll through them. There's even other panels of information. So all this is swapping out the subform in this main area. So any questions yet before I show how this is done?
No, we're good, thank you.
Do you use that control that Microsoft uses, or they're in the newer access forms? There is that special form of navigation control, I think they call it.
Yeah, there is a navigation control, but we looked into the navigation control, and we found that it still wasn't as controllable or as programmable as we wanted it to be. Because we wanted to be able to take these and show and hide them. We wanted to be able to do special things when we clicked on them. And we also wanted to be able, I don't show it here in this application, but there was other times where we wanted to be able to sort these in a different way. So all of that is much harder to do with the built-in navigation control. So if the navigation control works for you, then I'd say go ahead and continue using it, but this is an alternate method to have it all be built in onto a form so that the whole thing kind of goes along for the ride.
It works for the customer because I got a version from Access who was built by someone. I wouldn't never use that navigation control because I personally don't like it. But
yeah, we don't either.
And very extremely, and it works quite well. I'm astonished.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just show quickly how this works. So like I said, they're good performance. One thing, and there's no need for multiple rows of tabs, and that, like I said, they're flexible. You can hide and show them, and you can sort them in a custom way if you like, or even have the user be able to change the sorting if you allow for that in the UI. So what I wanted to show is, the reason it's better performance is because tabs, you guys probably all know this, but tabs, if you don't take steps to avoid it, they all load when the form loads. So if you had 12 tabs or something, all 12 of them would load when the form is trying to load, and that can take a long time. And of course, if you open up a form that has tabs, you may never go to the billing events tab, and yet Access would load it anyway because it's loading it in the background. Now you can have tabs load, you can write special code to have tabs load only when they're clicked, but that's some extra workaround code that you have to do. So in this case, these only load when you click them. So in other words, this is a subform here that the general form is loaded into, and the detail form is not loaded at all until I click it, and when I click it, then it loads. So that postpones the loading until when you need it, so it's just in time, and all of the other ones that you never click, they'll never load, so you don't have to waste the time doing it. So the way we do it is we have a table, and our naming convention at J Street is that we name tables that drive the system. In other words, they're not user data, they're application data. We prefix them with tsys. So we have a tsys panel table, project panel, and it's in the front end, not the back end. The reason it's in the front end is because it relates to coding, because it relates to loading all these subforms. We wouldn't want it in the back end because if we rolled out a new version of the application that had a new panel, that goes with the application version in the front end. You wouldn't want it to show up for everybody in the back end. So you got to know where your data is supposed to be. We have a sequence field here, so that shows the order in which they display. If we ever wanted to change the order of these, all we'd have to do is change these numbers and roll the application out, and they would show up in that order. We would not have to, importantly, we would not have to go into the design of the form and move tabs around, because that would be terrible. All we have to do is go into this driver data and change it. So that's how that works there. And then here's a snippet of code. But again, if you're on this call and you're a member of DAAUG, then Jim can get you the application that I was showing. I actually am not going to give away this application because it's huge. But in this case, you'll be able to see this code here. So I wanted to show how it works. So when you load the form, all we do is run select panel. And when you click on a panel in that list box on the left, then we also run select panel. And then here's the bottom line of what the code happens. I only wanted to point a couple of things out here. One is that we turn the panel off while we're swapping so that it's smoother. So we turn the visibility of it off. We change the hourglass so that we can see that it's working in case it takes a little time. And then another thing here is we swap in the source object, which is basically taking a subform and moving it into that particular frame over on the right. But we reset the master and child fields. They should be exactly the same every time, because you notice that they're just hard-coded to project key, because every one of these sub panels here, of course, is linked to this apartment, which is that particular project key. So that's fine. But why do we reset it? Well, because Access has had a bug for a long time that when you change out a source object, the link master field and the link child fields can be cleared out. It can sometimes Access drops those, and we've never figured out when it drops it and when it doesn't. It doesn't seem to be consistent over many versions of Access. So we just in case, we reload them here anyway. So that's a little trick that you should know.
I know that bug is always in older versions of Access, which I use, for example, the 13 in.
Yep, it's been there for a long time, and I don't know if they'll ever fix it, or if they have fixed it, and I don't care because we just reload it every time just to make sure. But that way, this is backward compatible with older versions of Access where that could be a problem. And then one other thing I want to point out that's kind of interesting is we actually build a procedure in the subforms called load activity. And what we do is instead of relying on the open event or the load event to occur in that form, that can happen in weird timing. In other words, when you load a subform into a main form, sometimes the events for load and open happen at times that you don't expect, or in the order that you do not expect. And that can be really disconcerting because things happen at times and you're like, oh no, I don't want that to load yet. Do I use the open event or the load event, or does it even fire in this circumstance? It can be a real confusing thing. So instead of using the build, it's a mess. So instead of relying on those events to happen, what we do is this little trick. We build something called load activity, and it's just a procedure in each of the subforms that we're loading into this frame. But load activity doesn't run on its own. It's not connected to the the open or the load event of the form. It's just a procedure. But let's say it has some stuff where you have to initialize some combo boxes and you have to do some extra things, and you want to do that after the form loads into there. Well, look, we made our own, and we just call it. So we say me subpanel, which is the frame, and then we say in the form that's inside that subpanel, just do .load activity. A lot of people don't know that you can just call a procedure inside a subform with this syntax. Well, what if we forgot to put, yes, it has to be in there and public. But what if you don't have any load activity that you need? Well, what we do is we trap for it. So one of these errors will occur down here if there's no load activity. So then we just move forward and we just keep on rolling and nothing happens. So this runs it if it's there, and it just skips it if it isn't. Okay, Jim is telling me I need to speed up. So you can use this technique in your code if you want to use panels and load them on the fly.
That's an excellent technique, Armen. I had never considered that load activity kind of thing. You're right, it can be screwy.
Yeah, so to avoid all that nonsense, we weren't smart enough to figure all the timing out, so we did our own load activity, and it's really smooth to do that. And you can do, even if you don't do panels, you can actually, if you have complex subforms, you can use that load activity technique, and then you know when it runs, because like I said, it runs after you load in the source object, and then you manually run whatever load activity you need to run. So it's a nice technique, even if you're not doing panels. Okay.
If you look for access, it's or for VBA, as it's fully object oriented, you could do your own with events anyway. That means you could push the events, which is much more stable than using the events of which access loads.
Yes, right. And this is just sort of a quick and dirty way of doing that type of thing. All we're doing is just calling a procedure when we want to call it. But yeah, you can get really clever with your own event code if you like. This is not an example of that. This is just a simple example. Okay, well, we've had really good questions, but that's caused us to take a little longer on these. So I want to kind of go through a couple of these really fast. These are the custom DVD buttons. I'm not going to explain them a lot because you can see what they do. This is the extreme example of it. You can see that I'm record 16 of 1691. If I close this form and this has a lot of selections, so I'm going to go ahead and just put in the city of Bellingham, let's say. And now I'm only going to get projects in Bellingham. You can see that there's still quite a few, but not that many. If I double click on the first one, you can see there's 61 projects, and I can just click through them this way, 1, 2, 3, right? All right, you guys are all saying, yeah, so what, Armen? The access record navigation does the same thing. Well, one is I don't really like the way the access record navigation looks, and I don't like that you can type in the number of a record because that usually doesn't make any sense. You just want to click through them. How would you know whether it's number 17 or number 6? But the other reason I really hate the record navigation that's built into Access is that it relies on the record set being open to 61 records or 6,000 records, and that's very bad performance when your backend is in SQL Server. So in other words, the Access record nav depends on a form being opened in update mode for many records, and that's a no-no. So what we do is, notice I'm on record 6. When I close this, now I'm here on record number 6. So what we do, just briefly, because I know I have to wrap up here, we navigate this hidden form up and down from the detail form. So when I drill in here and I'm on record number 6, I have just opened this form to only record number 6, and I'm putting of 61 because I know that this form back here has 61 records in its record source. So when I click the next button, what I'm actually doing is reaching back to the hidden form that's back there with the whole 61 and using a bookmark to navigate to the next record, find out what the key is, and then reset the key to this form of the next one, which is Texas Street. And then I requery this form and I'm there. And what's cool is that I can be on something like points and I can navigate and I stay on points. In other words, I stay right where I am. I can be on 8609 and navigate, and I stay on 8609 panel. So everything stays in sync, but I'm dropping this whenever I click a navigator, I'm actually dropping the whole record, abandoning it, and resetting to the first, next, or last, or whatever. Does that make sense?
Very nice.
Very good.
So in the example I'll give you, I'm not going to give you that full project example of the apartment buildings, but this has the exact same code. In the access template that I'm going to give you, the index form gets hidden, but I'm really navigating the index form and only setting the detail form to one record at a time, and they stay synchronized. So users really understand how they really get it, that they're moving up and down the record set that they've already selected by putting in some criteria. Okay? And this is one where I'm not going to go into the code. I'm just going to say it's in there. And in the access template that I showed you here, this code exists here too. So I have, you can drill down and you notice that it's record 1 of 3, and I can just click through them. You notice that I'm enabling and disabling the buttons just like you'd expect, because once you get to the top, you can't go any further. And once you get to the bottom, you can't go any further, etc. So you can look at this code and try it out. Cool. Okay. This is a really quick one. We'll wrap up here pretty soon, Jim, I think. Read-only checkmarks. You know, checkboxes look bad when they're locked because they still look like they have a little box and they look like they're editable. But what we do is we show a little wingding there instead when it's not editable. So for example, in this form here, like if I go to the access template here again, you notice that there's this little wingding here? That looks so much nicer than sticking a checkbox in there, because then it ends up with a little box and you're tempted to click on it to try to change it, but you can't in this. This is read-only. So the way we do that is super simple. All we do is change the control source of that of this control to an immediate if the active flag is false, if the active flag is not false, remember we can't check for true because we don't know if it's going to be a negative one or a positive one, so we always check for false. If it's not false, then stick in a U with an umlaut. That's for you, Klaus. There's a U with an umlaut. That in Wingdings translates to this little checkbox. Otherwise, if it's false, if this condition isn't met, then we just stick a blank in there. Any questions on this?
I like it. I do too.
It's just, you know what? It's that little bit of polish, you know? Sometimes we get an application working just right, and then there's something that just bugs you about it because you can't get it just perfect. And this is one of those things that's just nice.
Very nice.
And we use these not only in lists, we also use them on detail forms, but it's only when you need to show a check mark that isn't updatable. And we can just do it this way instead. Okay. So you can, again, that's in the access template. If when you get that, you'll be able to poke around and see that. Oh, here's a good one, and I think this is the next to last one. Controlling the exit. You know how in access, let me go to a different one. The example for this one, I believe, is, I think it's in the chamber. So you know at the upper right, you see here that I have this X, and you could close the application using the X, right? Well, I normally want people to close the application using my exit button on my form. Are you sure you want to exit? And I can hit cancel and come right back. But what if I don't want to let them close all of access? Well, that one closes, but this one, look at that. I clicked the red X, but access template, this application said, are you sure you want to exit? And when I say, no, I don't, it stays right here. Same thing here. I try to close up here. Sure you want to exit? Nope. So I've had developers insist that they want to go into the Windows handle of access and take away the X. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You cannot take away standard default behavior. Your users will freak out. You can't take away the X. Let's just control it. So what we do is we don't hide or disable it because that's not Windows standard. We trap for it and see if that's really what they want to do, and then we control whether they want to exit or not. So here's how it works. You know that the unload event on any form can be canceled, right? If you start to unload a form, you can cancel that event. But guess what? If you cancel the unload of any form because you hit the X to try to close access, in other words, because of a quit, then the whole quit gets canceled. In other words, if you start to close access and any form says, oh no, I don't want to unload, I'm canceling my unload event, then access stops the whole train and nothing closes. Pretty cool, right? So what that means is we can stop access from closing if we prevent a form from unloading. Well, we have to write an are you sure question into the unload event of a form that's always loaded. So what we do is in our applications, this main menu is always loaded. It just is hidden when we open up another form. So when I click index, that form is not there anymore. It's not there, it's hidden, but it's still open, it's just hidden. But if I cancel the unload event of that form because I click the X, then I can stop and say, show a message box. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
The only problem, there's a but, and here's the but. If you use global variables in VBA, they will get cleared out when you do this little trick. Because unfortunately, when the people when they coded access, when the access team built access way back in the day, 25 years ago, they decided that they would clear all the global variables And then they discovered that the form is, you're canceling the unload event of the form, but too bad, your globals are all gone already. So that's not going to work. So what you have to do is either don't use globals long-term, which you really shouldn't be using anyway, because globals aren't meant for long-term use. Or if you really need to keep track of something, just use the new temp vars, which came out several years ago, a lot of years ago now. Or you can, what I like a technique is you actually have another hidden form, maybe even your main menu, that has a bunch of controls on it that are hidden. And that way, if you ever need to debug your globals, you can make them visible on that form and see what's in them. Temp vars is kind of hard because you have to use the immediate window and dump them out that way. So here's a quick sample of the code, but you can also see it in the template that I'm going to give you. But basically what you have to do is you have to, on the unload event, you have to prompt, but you also have to see if they've already answered, because if you clicked it normally with the exit button on the form, then Access is also going to quit, and you have to set a variable that says they've already said it's okay to leave, so let's not ask them again. Does that make sense? If they click the normal exit button, we're already asking them anyway. So if they click OK, Access is going to quit, but we don't want to ask them again. That would be stupid. So we set a little variable here that says they've already said that they're good to go, so let them go. But if they click here, they haven't set that we haven't set that variable, so it shows a different error message. Are you sure you want to exit? You notice the wording is slightly different because that tells me that they're doing the main exit procedure instead of this exit button. So that's why we have to set a little variable that says exit already confirmed. So any questions on this one before I go to the very last one?
No, Armen, thank you.
Yep.
We have to get out of here. Microsoft wants us out by 8.
Oh, okay. Well,
so George, do we want to end this or do one more?
Let's give him 38.5 seconds.
All right.
38.5 seconds. I'll give you one little tip about the back end of.
Thank you, Armen.
You bet. When you have the back end of SQL Server, Access reports will evaluate the SQL Server record set even before the open event. And that's in order to get column definitions of the record set. So in other words, especially in a pass-through query, if you have a report or a form even based on a pass-through query, which we often do, it will evaluate the record set and run it even before the open event, so you don't even have a chance to set the where clause. And that can cause a really big delay because that opening of the record set can take a long time. So what we do is we set a little time bomb in there, a little gift. It's not a time bomb, it's a gift to the next time this report or even a form opens. What we do is we set the where clause of the SQL statement to where 1 = 0, which means no records will be returned, and that will run very quickly. SQL Server will instantly tell that you don't need any records, so it won't give you any. And then when the report opens, in the open event, you can use code to update the where clause with a real one. So by the time the report opens, you already have a where clause and you're off and running. So we discovered this problem a while back, and we discovered that the report took forever to open, and we discovered it was because that where clause was that record set was being run in SQL Server before we had a chance to stop it or change the where clause. So then what you have to do is when the report closes, go in and reset this again and leave it for the next time it runs. So you have to leave it in there when the report closes so that it'll be ready to go for the next time. And this will increase performance a lot when you're opening that report the next time. Any questions on that one?
Excellent. No.
Good idea.
Good tip. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, so we have to wrap up. You guys have to leave. I'm really happy that I was able to do this for you guys. Thank you for the opportunity. Any last questions or comments, and then we'll wrap it up.
Armen, thank you. Thank you very much. That was
good. Glad you liked it. All right. Have a good night, everybody.